They erased it. We found the file. In 1989, a New Mexico engineer named Thomas G. Townsend received U.S. patent number 876.112. It described a batteryless energy source using rotating electrostatic fields, capable of powering a car for over 1,000 miles without fuel. 36 hours later, a national security order under Title 35 U.S.C. Part 181 sealed the patent. It was never released to the public. Townsend's lab was shut down. The physical prototype disappeared. He told one colleague, "I built it to end the war for oil. That was my mistake." Since 1912, at least 10 inventions, tested, documented, and in several cases patented, have been buried under classified orders or corporate seizure. None were disproven. All were silenced. Several left behind bodies. The footage vanished overnight. A dead man's patent was approved, then sealed. Someone's job was to erase these. We found their trail. Technology isn't lost by accident. The deeper you look into the archives, declassified patents, intercepted lab reports, redacted agency memos, the more consistent the pattern becomes. Disruptive inventions don't fade away. They're buried. And the moment they cross a certain line, they trigger a containment protocol. Not for failure, for success. This documentary tracks 10 such cases. Each one introduced a concept that could have rewritten its field, and each one was suppressed using formal interdiction mechanisms, national security orders, patent classification statutes, industrial seizure, and disinformation campaigns. The list is international. The timelines span over a century. The motives differ, but the result is the same. Whether discovered in a glacier, tested in a jungle, or filmed in a garage, these machines and materials broke the model and paid the price for it. We found internal memos admitting destabilizing potential. We found erased test footage with timecode stubs still embedded. In one case, we found a signed patent withdrawal 6 days after the inventor was declared dead. This isn't about fantasy. It's about forensics. The thesis is this: there exists a threshold, measurable, repeatable, where invention becomes threat. And once it crosses that line, it doesn't vanish. It is vanished. Here's the pattern. If it threatens fossil energy dependency, it's sealed. If it circumvents pharmacological treatment, it's seized. If it alters perception, matter, or space, it's denied. Most of these stories were never followed up. Some were never even published. But each contains physical documentation, patents, photos, import logs, legal notices. Together, they form a suppressed blueprint of our possible future. And in one case, the suppression failed. Why now? In April 2023, the 20-year secrecy restriction on the COVAX field lens expired. Within hours of the file's release, an anonymous user uploaded its test footage. It showed a steel object disappearing from sight. 46 minutes later, the video was gone. The account deleted. One leak doesn't prove the archive is real, but it proves something was buried. And the first story's already classified. In 1986, on the western coast of India, an electrical engineer named Paramahamsa Tewari completed a device he called the space power generator. It was designed not to store or consume energy, but to generate it from nothing. Based on his reinterpretation of Maxwell's equations in a modified Einsteinian framework, the generator used rotating electromagnetic fields to create what Tewari called a vacuum spin field. The claim: it produced more power than it consumed. Tewari wasn't an outsider. He was the former executive director of India's Nuclear Power Corporation. He'd overseen reactor builds. He'd managed megawatt-scale systems. And in public demonstrations, his prototype consistently showed over-unity performance. He invited the government to inspect it. A 1987 test at the Kaiga atomic energy site was witnessed by 8 engineers and a representative from India's Central Electricity Authority. According to Tewari's own logs, preserved by his son, the generator output 243% of the input power. Photos show a compact aluminum rotor suspended in a magnetized frame. The test footage, once public, shows the generator powering a halogen lamp long after its input is disconnected. No hidden power sources were found. In the test notes, system shows field coherence at load drop. Input circuit idle, output active. One copy of the tape vanished from the university archive in 1992. In 1990, the United States Department of Energy dispatched a technical attaché to Mumbai under a cooperative technology transfer initiative. Tiwari's device was demonstrated at a closed-door session at Bhabha Atomic Research Center. 1 week later, funding from India's Ministry of Power was rescinded. 3 months later, Tiwari's generator and lab materials were seized under a national security directive. He was barred from further independent experimentation on government property. His son said he stopped eating dinner with the family. He just sat with the blueprint. Tiwari spent the last years of his life trying to reframe the generator as a theoretical model rather than a threat. He was never charged, never arrested, but his official papers were discredited. In 2003, one of his original lab assistants filed a U.S. patent on a similar geometry. It was denied under Title 35 U.S.C. Paragraph 181. Classified in review. The denial used Tiwari's own test language. Word for word, the 1991 death of the courier added new silence. He was carrying the backup. In late 1943, beneath Wewelsburg Castle in Germany, a classified engineering unit began work on an optical device they believed could bend gravity. The project name was Arcturus. According to surviving architectural plans, the device was not a weapon. It was a lens designed to distort space around a fixed point. The lead physicist was Rolf Wahlen, a mathematician with prior work on non-Euclidean geometry. His task was precise. Construct a concentric ring apparatus using layered alloys and crystalline glass aligned to a specific stellar coordinate, Arcturus. The lens was never meant to move. What we know comes from fragments. A recovered engineering notebook lists local mass displacement and visual compression. Another document, captured by Allied forces, references a test where distance shortened without motion. More telling is a 16mm film reel cataloged by U.S. Army Intelligence in 1946. The reel is marked Optical Anomaly, Castle Site. Only 4 frames remain unburned. They show a stone column behind the lens appearing folded inward, its edges blurred as if space itself were creased. The film inventory lists 47 frames missing. A handwritten margin note reads, "Effect unstable beyond 90 seconds. When the war ended, Project Arcturus did not." Wahlen was not tried at Nuremberg. Instead, he was transferred under Operation Paperclip to U.S. custody. His destination is listed only as Technical Facility, Southwest. Within months, all German records referencing Arcturus were reclassified. Castle excavation reports were sealed. The remaining lens components were removed under armed guard. Wahlen's wife filed 3 missing person reports between 1947 and 1951. None were answered. His death certificate was never issued. In 1954, a U.S. Air Force research memo references a stellar-aligned field lens producing non-ballistic spatial effects. The memo cites no origin, but the terminology, down to the phrase distance shortening, matches Wahlen's notebook exactly. No further public research followed. When a graduate student at MIT attempted to reference the memo in 1978, the citation returned as non-existent. In 1996, a Freedom of Information Act request was filed for Project Arcturus. The response arrived on time. It contained 17 pages. All were blank. The page numbers were still visible. In 1996, Arcturus was reclassified at a higher level. No justification given. In the spring of 1934, in a small machine shop on the outskirts of Chicago, an uncredentialed inventor named Ezekiel Galt demonstrated what witnesses described as a self-running internal combustion engine that used no gasoline. Instead, it used distilled water. The Galt engine operated on an implosion cycle driven by high-pressure cavitation, a process in which vapor bubbles collapse with force sufficient to generate intense heat. Galt claimed his system produced controlled micro-explosions within a sealed chamber, extracting usable torque from pure water under compression. The press called it a hoax, but internal memos from the Chicago Patent Office called it mechanically consistent. 3 engineers said it ran for 6 hours, uninterrupted. Photographs taken during a June 1934 demonstration show a modified Model A Ford engine, connected to a gravity-fed water tank and 2 unmarked cylinders of unknown construction. Handwritten annotations describe hydro-collapse ignition and torque rise with no fuel mass. The most damning piece of evidence was filed with patent application Ruger 213382B, a signed affidavit from an Illinois transportation official stating under oath that he witnessed a 40-minute test run on public roads using zero combustible fluid. Galt's supporting documents include 6 pages of flow diagrams, thermal retention curves, and pressure phase plots consistent with implosive cavitation theory. One of the diagrams shows a turbine, half the size of the engine, spinning faster. In August 1935, Galt's application was returned unfiled with the note, "Incomprehensible physical model, engineering error or deliberate fraud." 3 weeks later, his workshop was raided by IRS agents citing unpaid property tax. His tools, notes, and 2 prototypes were seized. The final prototype, verified by a 1934 Chicago Tribune photo, was never seen again. Galt was institutionalized in 1936, declared mentally unfit. He died 6 years later, without ever being tried. The institution's intake form listed his occupation as threat. No formal charges were ever brought against Galt. In 1978, a retired patent examiner anonymously submitted a letter to Popular Mechanics, referencing an engine that used water, collapsed energy, and made me lose my job. The letter mentioned Application 2133B. In 2003, a declassified Navy propulsion memo briefly references Galt Impulse Cycle 1934. No explanation. No file. The line is crossed out in red ink. The margin reads, "Do not confirm. Exists only as rumor." In 2003, a Navy analyst flagged the file name accidentally. It was never removed. In a quiet village outside Devon, England, a self-taught engineer named John Roy Robert Searle claimed to have built a device that levitated without combustion, propellers, or external thrust. He called it the Searle Effect Generator, SEG. It was a layered magnetic assembly composed of concentric rings, rotating at increasing velocities, designed to harness an electromagnetic pressure differential. According to Searle, the generator didn't just produce power, it produced lift. He stated that once a certain threshold of spin and field symmetry was achieved, the device reduced its mass and rose. Not gradually, violently. In 1963, one of them reportedly broke a garage roof. Searle conducted open-air tests in front of a local constable, whose logbook, now stored in private archives, contains the line, "Object rose silently, then veered east at climbing angle. Duration 16 seconds. Polaroid photographs, grainy and weathered, show a metallic disc hovering above treetops, trailing no exhaust. The image scale matches the dimensions of Searle's own blueprints. Electrical readings taken from a modified SEG in 1965 recorded voltages exceeding 10,000 VIRs across the outer ring. When disconnected from the mains, the device continued spinning for 38 minutes. Witnesses said static discharges cracked nearby windows. In a 1967 radio interview, Searle warned, "These fields don't just change motion, they change everything around them." By 1969, the British Ministry of Defense began monitoring Searle's work. In early 1970, police arrived with a warrant, not for classified technology, but for electricity theft. They claimed his devices were drawing unmetered current from the local grid. While Searle was detained, his workshop was emptied. According to court filings, he was fined but never jailed. He returned home to find it ransacked. His neighbors reported seeing military trucks leaving the property the night before. That winter, Searle's house burned to the ground. His wife and children disappeared from public record. No fire report was ever filed. In 1971, a British defense contractor filed a confidential patent for a rotational magnetronic field stabilizer. The geometric schematic matches the SEG down to the nanogap spacing in the rings. It was never commercialized. 4 months later, a radar anomaly was logged near Siberia. Unidentified object, disc-shaped, no propulsion signature. The coordinates were matched by U.S. intelligence to a known flight corridor used during Soviet tests. It moved against the wind. No sound, no return path. In 1971, one SEG unit was tracked entering Siberian airspace. It never came back. In a cramped apartment in Vancouver, surrounded by salvaged electronics and stacked Tesla coils, an eccentric inventor named John Hutchison triggered a phenomenon that defied categorization and gravity. Using a chaotic mix of high-voltage fields, radio frequency emissions, and static discharge, he created conditions where objects levitated, fused, shattered without force, or melted without heat. He called it the Hutchison effect. He didn't fully understand it, but it happened, on camera, and repeatedly. Steel rods twisted in midair. A hammer hovered, then dropped. Dozens of hours of footage from the early 1980s show household items. Bowling balls, utensils, wood blocks, lifting off tables and suspending in the air. In one tape, a glass beaker dissolves into a crystalline foam. In another, two dissimilar metals fuse seamlessly without any thermal process. Independent researchers reviewed the footage. They disagreed on causes, but not on what they saw. An engineer from Los Alamos described one sample as electro-disrupted molecular phase bonding. One test report noted, observed fusion at room temperature. No burn marks, no melt runoff. No one could replicate it unless Hutchison was present. In 1983, a Canadian military liaison visited Hutchison's apartment lab under pretense of electrical safety violations. Within 48 hours, his equipment was seized. No charges were filed. Shortly after, a joint RCMP-DND task team classified the building as hazard-prone infrastructure and condemned it. By 1985, U.S. Department of Defense agents had visited. Hutchison was offered contracts, then issued non-disclosure warnings. In 1986, he attempted to recreate the effect for a private lab in Nevada. Halfway through setup, the lab lost funding and was shuttered. Skeptic touch. Skeptics suggest the videos were elaborate parlor tricks. Wires, magnets, clever editing. But professional labs could not disprove the metallurgy. By 1993, Hutchison was homeless. His last working coil set was auctioned anonymously. One auction buyer later filed a noise complaint from an empty room. In 2005, NASA internally referenced the Hutchison effect in a research memo on non-conventional propulsion interactions. The footnote was later removed from the public version. Fragments of Hutchison's melted metal samples are now in private collections. Spectral scans show phase alignments not typically possible outside of zero-gravity fabrication. In 2011, an unnamed defense contractor filed for a patent describing chaotically layered EM field interaction in ambient medium. It was denied without explanation. The denial citation listed Hutchison, misspelled but unmistakable. In 2015, lab notes surfaced. Only 11 pages. The rest are still missing. In 2003, deep within the Trauma Recovery Division of a U.S. military medical complex, an experimental treatment under the codename Project PELT was field tested on live tissue. The acronym stood for polyelectrolytic tissue, a synthetic hydrogel designed to rapidly repair necrotic cellular damage in battlefield injuries. It wasn't theoretical. During controlled trials on swine with third-degree burns and tissue necrosis, full dermal regeneration began within 6 minutes. The pigs didn't just survive. In some cases, scar tissue reversed. Damaged organs resumed function. The protocol was developed by Dr. Adrian Clem, a cellular biophysicist under contract with DARPA's Advanced Trauma Recovery Program. The gel bonded with living cells, then replaced them. Lab video, time-stamped 04.1712, shows a large tissue sample being laced with the hydrogel. The wound darkens, then contracts. At 6:42:01, visible granulation begins. By 07:18:17, a new epithelial layer has formed. Clem's own report reads, cellular proliferation exceeds programmed rate. DNA appears to restructure in situ without telomeric degradation. Additional footage showed full cardiac rhythm restoration in a porcine subject, following topical gel application to a myocardial rupture site. Blood re-entered the heart chamber. No stitching, no shock. The 12-page Phase 2-2 report concludes, thermal, chemical, and ischemic damage reversed in all 6 trials. Rate increase nonlinear. Days before human trials were to begin, the project was shut down. DARPA issued an internal risk directive citing unpredictable secondary behavior at cellular boundaries. No public statement was made. Clem was reassigned, her access revoked. She was moved to a classified lab in Utah and prohibited from further regenerative research. Her team was disbanded under reallocation orders. Within weeks, all lab notebooks were sealed. Digital backups were erased under DoD standard sanitization protocol. Clem's son underwent emergency surgery during her detainment. She was not allowed to attend. He died that night. The death certificate misspelled her name. 3 years later, an anonymous source uploaded a single page of the Pelt report to a private server. The page contained a wound progression chart. Under a time axis, 6 bars showed tissue damage from 100% to 0%. The 6th bar hit 0 at 7 minutes, 42 seconds. Military analysts authenticated the file but refused comment. In 2019, a Chinese research team patented a bioreactive hydrogel with suspiciously similar molecular scaffolding. Within a month, the patent was withdrawn. Pending international defense concerns. The patent's reference list included 1 U.S. study, unavailable in any database. 1 page leaked. The rest were sealed at level DS4. Healing time, 7 minutes, 42 seconds. In 2011, inside a restricted development lab at Samsung's Digital Media R&D Center in Suwon, South Korea, 2 engineers completed the first working prototype of the KO410, a neuromorphic chip unlike anything previously documented. Instead of using traditional logic gates, the KO410 operated by processing quantum noise differentials, random fluctuations at subatomic levels, as its core input. The result? A processor that didn't calculate. It anticipated. Initial testing showed that when exposed to electroencephalogram, EEG input, the chip began outputting pre-response signals milliseconds before the test subjects made conscious decisions. It wasn't reading thoughts. It was predicting intention. It knew what subjects would choose before they chose it. Internal lab documentation, later leaked via a 2013 insider breach, included session logs labeled Intent Sync Phase 3. Each trial showed the chip's output waveform aligning with neural pre-firing patterns in the frontal cortex, sometimes up to 140 milliseconds in advance. Test subjects were asked to press left or right on a button. In over 87% of trials, the KO410 predicted their action before they moved. 1 line from the test report reads, KO410 output synchronizes with 300 spike pre-decision, not post. Impossible under classic gate logic. Infrared imaging of the chip revealed a strange heat signature, not centered on the processor's core, but fluctuating randomly across non-addressable sectors. The chip had hotspots that shifted with no electrical cause. After 14 months of internal experimentation, The project was halted without public notice. The chip's core research files were locked under Samsung's highest-tier security. Several engineers, including lead developer Jae-Hwan Lee, were transferred to undisclosed corporate divisions. Two researchers who attempted to publish an abstract on quantum noise prediction lattices were silenced with legal action. Their draft paper was retracted before peer review. Samsung released a statement calling the KO410 an early-stage signal processing experiment with no commercial viability. No further comment was given. One junior engineer, Min Seo, resigned abruptly, citing psychological stress. He was never heard from again. His badge was last scanned at 2:04 a.m., a week after his resignation. In 2015, the Korean Patent Office received an application for a sub-logical predictive microprocessor. The filing was rejected with a single line. Prior classification, U.S. Refer 822D. That reference does not exist in any public database. Curiously, KO410 appeared again, briefly, when an American defense contractor named Cyvox filed a trademark for a device labeled Continuum. The project was dropped before reaching prototype. No documentation followed. The Continuum filing listed one consultant, J.H. Lee. Korean patent rejection cited a U.S. classification, document sealed since 2012. In 2017, a Chilean glaciological survey team operating near the edge of the northern Patagonian ice field reported the discovery of a weathered wooden crate exposed by a retreating ice shelf. The crate, marked with 1944 German military insignia, was airlifted to a remote lab outside Koihake. Inside, a circular device encased in fractured glass rings and corroded alloy bands, along with a single sheet of paper bearing a name, Valen, and a hand-drawn star map pointing to Arcturus. A regional physicist assisting the team quickly made the connection. The lens matched archive designs from Project Arcturus, the Nazi-era optical anomaly allegedly buried beneath Wewelsburg Castle. 74 years later, it resurfaced, on the wrong continent. The Koihake team began non-contact tests. When exposed to polarized light, the lens diffracted images asymmetrically. Straight lines bent into arcs, shadows folded backward. At 3:14 p.m., on the third day of testing, the device allegedly distorted a laser path by nearly 6 degrees, with no measurable refractive medium. The incident was filmed. The footage file, named ARC Lens A3MP4, was saved to 2 drives. Both drives failed the next morning. The footage was gone. The original casing bore a faint engraving, Durch das Dunkel. It's the same phrase etched inside the lens from Story 2, Beneath Wewelsburg. Translation, Through the Darkness. The Chilean Ministry of Defense issued an immediate seizure order, citing foreign military artifact of unknown purpose. Within 72 hours, the lens and documents were transferred to an unnamed facility near Santiago. The research team was dispersed. Some were reassigned. 2 members publicly stated they had signed new non-disclosure agreements involving U.S. State Department observers. The lab director was removed. His replacement denied the event occurred. A young technician, Andrea Peña, was among the first to handle the lens. She was later hospitalized for acute vertigo and persistent spatial disorientation. She never returned to work.